The glitz and glamour of Hollywood often hide the darkest of shadows, but no one could have predicted the nightmare that would unfold in the exclusive enclave of Brentwood in December 2025. It began as a quiet Sunday afternoon in one of Los Angeles's most prestigious neighborhoods, a place where privacy is bought and silence is expected. But the silence that settled over the home of Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle Singer Reiner was different. It was the silence of a life suddenly and brutally extinguished. Rob Reiner was more than just a legendary director, or the man the world knew as Meathead from All in the Family. He was a cornerstone of American culture, a storyteller who taught us how to love with When Harry Met Sally and how to find our way home with Stand By Me. His wife Michelle was his partner in every sense, a talented photographer and producer who stood by him for over 35 years. Together they were seen as Hollywood royalty, a rare example of lasting love and shared purpose in an industry known for its fleeting connections. Yet on December 14, 2025, that legacy was shattered. The discovery of their bodies inside their gated mansion on South Chadbourne Avenue sent shockwaves through the nation. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong or a random act of violence. This was a tragedy that struck from within. Investigators quickly focused their attention on the one person who had unrestricted access to the property and its most intimate routines, their 32-year-old son, Nick Reiner. As the details began to emerge, they painted a picture of a family that had spent decades fighting a losing battle against addiction and mental instability. Rob and Michelle had spent millions trying to save their son, navigating through 18 different treatment programs, and even collaborating on a film to help him find his footing. But in the end, their final act of compassion, inviting him back into their home to provide him with structure and safety, may have been the very thing that sealed their fate. Today we are diving deep into the investigation that has left even the most seasoned detectives unsettled. We will explore the 7 shocking details that have come to light since that fateful night, from the chilling behavior witnessed at a star-studded holiday party just hours before the killings to the controversial legal battle now unfolding. With an estate valued at over $200 million and a high-powered defense attorney known for representing the most notorious names in Hollywood, the question is no longer just about what happened inside that Brentwood home. It is about whether justice can truly be served when the accused is using the victim's own fortune to fight for his freedom. This is the story of a family defined by love, destroyed by tragedy, and now caught in a legal storm that threatens to overshadow everything Rob Reiner spent his life building. The beginning of the end did not take place in the shadows of a dark alleyway, but under the twinkling holiday lights of a multi-million-dollar estate in West Los Angeles. On Saturday, December 13, 2025, just 24 hours before the world would change forever, Conan O'Brien opened his doors for his annual holiday celebration. This event was a staple of the Hollywood social calendar, a rare sanctuary where the industry's elite could relax without the prying eyes of paparazzi or the flash of smartphone cameras. Among the guests were some of the most recognizable faces in entertainment, including Larry David, Billy Crystal, and Jane Fonda. Rob and Michelle Reiner arrived that evening, but they were not alone. Accompanied by their son Nick, the couple appeared to be putting on a brave face despite growing internal turmoil. Sources close to the family have since revealed that the weeks leading up to this party were filled with deep anxiety for the Reiners. They had observed a troubling shift in Nick's behavior, noting disrupted sleep patterns, unexplained absences, and a series of communications that left them deeply unsettled. Bringing him to the party was a strategic choice. They hoped a festive environment might lift his spirits, but more importantly, they were afraid to leave him alone at the Brentwood home. Rob had even gone so far as to call Conan in advance to ask for a last-minute addition to the guest list, a request that was granted immediately given their long-standing friendship. However, as soon as the trio entered the room, the contrast was jarring. While Rob and Michelle moved through the crowd with their usual warmth and grace, Nick stood out for all the wrong reasons. Dressed in casual attire, with a hood pulled low over his face, he remained on the fringes of the celebration, his presence casting a shadow over the festive atmosphere. Witnesses later described a demeanor that was not just antisocial but actively disturbing. Nick began to move through the house with a predatory sort of focus, watching guests intently while refusing to engage in normal pleasantries. When he did speak, it was to ask abrupt personal questions about people's backgrounds in a flat, monotone voice that prompted several attendees to politely excuse themselves. Jane Fonda would later recall a chilling encounter where Nick stood uncomfortably close to her, remaining completely silent for a duration that felt an eternity, leaving her with a sense of dread that she could not shake. The tension reached a breaking point during an interaction with actor Bill Hader. According to those nearby, Nick interrupted Hader's private conversation with the same unsettling interrogation tactics he had used on others. When Hader calmly attempted to maintain boundaries and continue his discussion, Nick didn't walk away. Instead, he stood perfectly still, staring at Hader for several seconds with an expression that witnesses described as one of visible, simmering frustration. The laughter in that corner of the room died instantly as a heavy, uncomfortable silence took hold. Rob Reiner, ever the observant father, realized that the situation was slipping out of control. He pulled Nick aside into a quieter hallway, hoping to de-escalate the tension away from the eyes of their peers. But the mask of normalcy had fully slipped. Guests in the vicinity could hear the strain in Rob's voice as he urged his son to regain his composure and behave with basic respect. Michelle was caught in the middle, desperately trying to pacify her husband while pleading with her son to settle down. Nick's response was not one of remorse, but of increasing hostility, his remarks growing sharper and louder until the energy of the entire party shifted. Realizing that the evening was beyond saving, Rob and Michelle made the difficult decision to leave early. As they walked toward the exit, guests noticed the profound weariness and worry etched into their faces. One attendee recalled how they kept glancing back at Nick with a look of heartbreaking care, unaware that they were looking at the person who would soon bring their lives to a violent end. Nick did not leave with them. He stayed behind a dark figure in a room full of light, leaving everyone present with the haunting feeling that something was very, very wrong. The transition from the uneasy, festive atmosphere of the O'Brien residence to the silent, leafy streets of Brentwood marked the beginning of a countdown that no one could stop. When Rob and Michelle Reiner returned to their home on South Chadbourne Avenue, they were likely exhausted, not just from the evening's social demands, but from the mounting emotional labor of managing their son's deteriorating state. Investigators have since reconstructed a timeline that suggests the household was quiet by midnight, with Rob and Michelle retiring to their bedroom, a space they believed was a sanctuary protected by Gates alarm systems and the supposed safety of their status. However, the security of the Reiner estate was compromised from within. Authorities confirmed that there were no signs of forced entry. The person who entered the living quarters was someone who knew the codes, the layout, and the nighttime rhythms of the house with intimate precision. Between midnight and the early morning hours, Nick Reiner is believed to have moved through the residence with an unsettling ease. Forensic specialists noted that his familiarity with the property allowed him to navigate the space without alerting his parents, suggesting that key events unfolded while the couple was likely resting. The details of the confrontation inside the primary suite are somber and difficult to process. Physical evidence suggests that the encounter was not a random or impulsive act, but a series of deliberate steps. Investigators discovered that the object used in the tragedy was not brought from outside. It was a common household item, something easily reached and already present within the home. This detail is particularly chilling to analysts, as it implies that the familiarity Nick had with his parents' environment was weaponized against them. When the findings were finally reviewed, the scale of the violence became clear. Initial reports had attempted to minimize the intensity of the incident, but later examinations revealed that both Rob and Michelle sustained multiple severe injuries. Forensic experts explained that the nature of these injuries repeated and at close range pointed toward direct intent, rather than a moment of sudden panic. The evidence suggests a fast-moving sequence driven by heightened emotion and sustained physical effort, indicating that the personal space of the victims was repeatedly crossed. The medical findings provided an even more harrowing picture. Analysis indicated that the victims may have been physically restricted during the struggle, requiring controlled movement and continued pressure over time. This led investigators to believe the confrontation was drawn out and intentional. The technical term for such an event describes a level of intensity that even experienced officials found difficult to process. By approximately 4:30 a.m., the house was silent once more. Nick Reiner reportedly exited the property and traveled to a hotel in Santa Monica. Staff at the hotel noted nothing out of the ordinary during his brief check-in. He appeared unsettled but gave no indication of the horror that had just occurred 20 minutes away. It would be many hours before the world learned of the tragedy. The situation only came to light that afternoon when a scheduled visitor arrived at the residence and received no response, leading worried relatives to enter the home and discover the distressing scene. By the time emergency services were contacted, medical findings estimated that Rob and Michelle had passed away several hours earlier. The sanctuary of Brentwood had become a crime scene, and the prodigal son had vanished into the early morning light. To understand the tragedy that unfolded in Brentwood, one must look back at the long, turbulent history of Nick Reiner. Being born the son of filmmaker Rob Reiner and the grandson of comedy icon Carl Reiner meant growing up in a world of immense privilege, but also one of crushing public expectations. From a young age, those close to the family noted that Nick felt fundamentally disconnected from the Hollywood machinery that surrounded him. While his peers were entering the family business with ease, Nick was already beginning a descent into a cycle of instability that would last for more than 2 decades. The Reiner family did not ignore these early warning signs. Rob and Michelle were proactive, seeking professional support for Nick while he was still a child. However, the struggle soon shifted from behavioral issues to a severe battle with substance abuse. Over the years, Nick moved through a staggering number of treatment programs, reportedly as many as 18 different facilities, in a desperate attempt to find long-term stability. His parents remained his primary lifelines, providing emotional encouragement and the financial resources necessary to access the best care available. Rob Reiner once famously remarked that parenting doesn't have an off switch, even when the situation becomes incredibly difficult. Despite these efforts, the situation continued to deteriorate. There were periods where Rob and Michelle attempted tough love, leading Nick to leave the home and attempt to live independently. These years were what Nick later described as the darkest chapter of his life, characterized by periods of homelessness and moves between Maine, New Jersey, and Texas. In 2015, it briefly appeared that a turning point had been reached. At age 22, Nick achieved a period of sobriety and collaborated with his father on the film Being Charlie. The project was deeply personal, inspired by Nick's own experiences in recovery, and for a time it seemed that creative collaboration had successfully rebuilt the trust between father and son. However, the progress was fragile. By 2018, Nick publicly acknowledged a relapse, which was followed by a serious medical emergency. His behavior became increasingly unpredictable, culminating in a troubling incident in his parents' guest house that forced Rob and Michelle to insist he return to treatment. This cycle of hope, followed by a painful reset, left the entire family emotionally drained. In 2020, Nick was allowed to return to the main Brentwood residence. This decision was made out of a sense of duty and fear. His parents believed that closer supervision and added structure were the only ways to manage his worsening mental health. But in the months leading up to December 2025, that fear turned into a grim realization. Rob and Michelle reportedly felt the situation was finally slipping beyond their ability to manage safely. Nick's story has now become a sobering case study for the public, a reminder that even limitless resources and decades of parental devotion cannot always guarantee a stable outcome when dealing with deep-seated psychological and substance-related struggles. The hours following the quiet tragedy at the Brentwood estate were marked by a chilling display of routine by the man now accused of the unthinkable. As the morning sun rose over Los Angeles, Nick Reiner began a wandering journey that seemed to lack both direction and remorse. At approximately 4:00 a.m., surveillance footage captured him checking into the Pierside Hotel in Santa Monica, a location just blocks from the famous pier and only 20 minutes from his parents' home. Witnesses at the front desk described him as appearing tweaked out, yet he managed to complete the transaction with a credit card reserving a room for the night. While the hotel staff initially saw nothing to warrant an emergency call, the scene left behind in that room would later tell a different story. Reports indicate that when staff eventually entered the suite, they discovered a disturbing environment. Blood was allegedly found throughout the shower and on the bed with sheets used to cover the windows in a desperate attempt to block out the world. Yet Nick was already gone. He never formally checked out, instead slipping back into the city as the afternoon discovery of his parents' bodies by his sister Romy ignited one of the most high-profile manhunts in recent California history. The search for Nick Reiner spanned nearly 19 hours, eventually leading investigators to the Exposition Park area near the University of Southern California, USC. It was here at an Arco gas station that surveillance cameras captured the final moments of his freedom. In the footage, Nick is seen wearing a green, white, and black tracksuit jacket, a black cap, and a red backpack. His demeanor was described as eerily calm, even as a man who appeared to be an undercover law enforcement officer entered the store while he was in line. Nick remained composed enough to purchase a sports drink without drawing immediate attention. The end came swiftly, just after 9:15 p.m. As Nick walked near the intersection of Exposition Boulevard and Vermont Avenue, at least 4 LAPD vehicles converged on his location with lights flashing. There was no struggle and no public statement. Photos from the scene show Nick immediately raising his hands in surrender as officers took him into custody. He was transported to the Twin Towers Correctional Facility, America's largest mental health jail, where he was booked on 2 counts of first-degree murder, with the special circumstance of multiple murders. Held without bail and placed in a blue suicide prevention smock, the man who had grown up in the heights of Hollywood luxury began his first night in a high-security solitary cell, the gravity of his actions finally colliding with the reality of the law. As the investigation into the Brentwood tragedy transitioned from the crime scene to the courtroom, a new and deeply polarizing controversy began to dominate the headlines: the high-stakes battle over the Reiner family fortune. At the center of this storm is Nick Reiner's legal representation. Shortly after his arrest, it was confirmed that Nick would be represented by Alan Jackson, one of the most formidable and expensive defense attorneys in the country. Jackson's resume reads like a who's who of high-profile litigation, having previously secured acquittals or favorable outcomes for clients like Kevin Spacey and Harvey Weinstein. The immediate question on everyone's mind was simple: how could Nick Reiner, a man who had been financially dependent on his parents for years and had no established career of his own, afford a lawyer whose fees can easily reach into the millions? On December 18, 2025, reports began to surface that the defense was being financed, at least in part, by the very estate Nick is accused of creating through violence. The Reiner estate, valued at an estimated $200 million, represents a lifetime of creative success, and the idea that these funds are being used to defend the couple's alleged killer has sparked a fierce national debate. Under California law, the situation is legally complex. The state's Slayer statute, Probate Code Section 250, is clear: an individual who feloniously and intentionally kills another person is barred from inheriting from that person's estate. However, there is a critical gray area that exists before a final verdict is reached. Until a conviction is secured, a named beneficiary, even one accused of the murder, may still have access to certain trust funds or advance payments for legal representation provided the estate's executors or trustees do not block the request. Sources close to the family suggest that Nick's surviving siblings Romy and Jake may have reached a heartbreaking consensus that a defense centered on mental health and their brother's long-standing struggles with schizophrenia is more aligned with their parents' compassionate nature than a standard adversarial trial. Alan Jackson himself has remained tight-lipped, declining to confirm the source of his payment. Outside the Los Angeles Superior Court, he told reporters, "I can't comment," even as public speculation grew. Legal analysts believe Jackson's strategy will likely hinge on Nick's mental competency. If the defense can prove that Nick was suffering from a psychotic break or was not medically cleared to understand his actions, the case could shift from a potential death penalty trial to a commitment in a mental health facility. This inheritance of blood has left the public divided. To some, it is a final, tragic extension of Rob and Michelle's devotion to their troubled son, using their legacy to ensure he receives a fair trial. To others, it feels like a severe breach of justice, where wealth provides a shield that most defendants could never dream of. As the next hearing on January 7, 2026 approaches, the courtroom will not just be weighing the evidence of a crime, but the morality of a system that allows a victim's life work to be spent on their own killer's defense. The story of the Reiner family is a harrowing reminder that even in the most gilded halls of Hollywood, there are battles that fame and fortune simply cannot win. For decades, Rob and Michelle Reiner embodied the pinnacle of creative success and marital stability, yet their private lives were defined by a relentless, exhausting struggle to save a son who seemed determined to drift away. Their tragedy raises profound questions that resonate far beyond the gates of Brentwood. How do we distinguish between the limits of parental love and the necessity of self-preservation? And at what point does support become a dangerous proximity to the very instability we seek to cure? As the legal proceedings move toward the critical hearing on January 7th, 2026, the focus will remain on Nick Reiner and the high-powered defense team now tasked with navigating a path through the unthinkable. Whether the court ultimately views this case as a premeditated act of violence or the tragic result of a long-term mental health crisis, the legacy of Rob and Michelle Reiner has been irrevocably altered. They spent their lives telling stories that celebrated the human spirit, but their final chapter has left the world with a sobering reflection on the fragility of hope. We will be following every update from the courtroom as this case continues to unfold. The intersections of wealth, mental health, and the American justice system have never been more visible than they are in this trial. What are your thoughts on the use of estate funds for a defense of this nature? Do you believe the justice system is equipped to handle cases where wealth and tragedy are so deeply intertwined? Please share your perspectives in the comments below. If you found this investigative report insightful, please give this video a like and share it with those who follow true crime and Hollywood history. Don't forget to subscribe to Memories of the Stars and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update on this and other breaking celebrity stories. Thank you for staying with us as we remember the lives of those lost and seek the truth behind the headlines.